is virtual and live. This is an open meeting, and those who wish to access
This conference will now be recorded.
Can do so through the posting of this meeting on the town's website. I will proceed with a roll call of attendees. Bob Donnelly,
Yes, here.
Judy Langone,
Just
Judy? Judy Langone,
I am here.
Kelly Newmy,
Here.
Alan Slater,
Here.
Tom McQuaid, Molly Ahern,
Here.
Emily Chambers,
I'm here.
Superintendent Dave Thompson,
Here.
School Committee Chair Teresa Stewart,
Here.
Member Maya Bodenhofer,
Here.
and Karen Sheridan, Business Manager.
Here.
If there's anybody else in attendance, please recognize yourself. Identify yourself, rather.
Joe Collins from the General Manager's Office.
Thank you. Okay. All righty. Housekeeping reminders, please keep your microphones on mute, raise your hand to speak, and all votes are going to be on roll call, okay? All right. First thing on the agenda is the acceptance of the minutes from Thursday, May 14th. And I have a motion to accept or changes.
I'll move to accept them.
Thank you, Bob. I need a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, Alan, seconds that. All in favor? All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Roll call, I'm sorry. Roll call, here we go. Alan,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Judy,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
and I'm a yes also, so unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so before we start tonight's meeting, I've had some conversations with members of the Finance Commission, and I feel that there may be a desire to revisit our vote of last Thursday, where we voted to accept the budget as we saw it on Thursday. Does anyone wish to make that motion? Alan?
I'd like to make a motion to reconsider our vote of May 14th to approve the budget.
Anybody second that?
I will second that.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, are you raising your hand to speak to that, or was it to second it?
Second it.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Slater, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we took a vote. The budget that we approved was really the pre-COVID budget. But a lot of information we received the last week or so indicates that there is a concern about some of the numbers we have, through no fault of our own or anybody's fault. It's just, looking at the some of the state aid issues, looking at some of the local receipt issues, and information we received from other communities that they're taking different actions than we are, whether it's to approve a 112 budget, or it's to minimize the growth in their budgets, given the uncertainty that we have. So for that reason, I think that we should reconsider portions of the budget and just proceed accordingly.
Okay, anybody else? I got the second, right? Okay. Any other further? Yes, Judy?
As Alan mentioned, there's some recent information coming to us. the place where I've looked more for information, and it just hit me, and I think I mentioned it the last time that I didn't feel we should be getting behind the curve, we should be getting ahead of the curve. And I was a little uncomfortable of voting for that budget that we did last week. But even in today's paper, the Boston Globe, the main article, one of the main articles on page 1, municipal officials pawn the layoffs as cuts as money dries up. And it's quite an article, and it has a number of towns in the Commonwealth that are cutting, furloughing, laying off in preparation of course, money drying up. And I think we need to take another look at where we are today, where we'll be July 1st, fiscal 21. And of course, if we spend our reserves in 21, we have very little, if any, for 22. I think we've got to take a more proactive approach to this. I don't want to be like Washington. They're behind the curve. They'll never catch up. I don't want to get into that position. And on one vote, I recognize that, but I think that we all have to be realistic, have some common sense, and know that things are not going to improve over the next 6 months to a year, and we better be ready.
Okay, anyone else? Kelly?
So, I read the articles in the Globe today as well. And I agree with the spirit of what Alan and Judy are saying for sure. What I'm wondering is if we could expedite, what I don't want to do is start cutting things in a vacuum or start cutting things that were promised to be corrected in the override, right? I don't want to do either of those things right now because I don't think we're there. But I do think taking a better look at what discretionary spending is in the budget and then figuring out how we can delay that for the time being for now until we have a more accurate depiction of what's going to happen in the economy is very smart. So I think I would go back to the last request that was made, and I believe Mr. Slater made the request, was to get a list of potential discretionary items that potentially could be on the table if we're in a significant challenge, say in September, and we need to make adjustments, or items that we could just delay right now and not move forward with until later, so that we could be in a better position should some unforeseen things happen in the economy. So I think that's something that would be very prudent to do. And that doesn't talk to the things like the mandates and stuff like that the school committee needs. That's stuff that's mandated by the state. But are there other things we're moving forward with, whether we've done them in the past or we've added them to this budget, that we can hold off on for now? One thing I was thinking with regards to the school, I mean, there's a lot of special education in there, and it's all mandated. We have to do it. Totally get it. But if schools aren't going back to a traditional classroom in the fall, do we have to hire them right now? Can we wait? Like, those are things I really want to look at to see if we can be smarter about how we're spending money in areas where we don't necessarily have to see the cash flow right now.
Yeah. Mr. Donnelly, would you like to say anything?
I don't know. I voted in favor of the budget. I do, as I spoke on Thursday, I do see the need for us to come up with a definitive plan B. I'm a little hesitant to vote to reconsider at this point, mainly because I don't know exactly, we do not have any idea here in terms of what kind of revenue changes we are expecting from state aid. We've already made the adjustments in our local department receipts. We've already made the adjustments in terms of the freeing up of free cash as a hedge against spending in FY 21. So are we asking to just delay the budget, or is there a specific request that the FinCom wants to make in regards to by what amount do we want to reduce the budget?
Mr. Slater, do you want to take that, or do you want?
I could, Ann. I understand what Mr. Donnelly is saying, what Bob is saying. We really just don't know where we are, whether it's with, state aid, particularly, Chapter 70, lottery funds, the the SOA funds that the schools are getting, circuit breaker, et cetera. We have some uncertainty about our local receipts. We don't really know yet the percentage of property tax we're going to be getting. We've always averaged well over 99%. Hopefully we'll do something close to that. For this year, we really don't know. What I would suggest, I could talk about a couple items where I feel that, we could maybe make some reductions without either affecting personnel or affecting services. But I think that we may want to consider, we can talk about some of them today, but, maybe we consider thinking about them and maybe having a meeting beginning of next week to take some kind of vote, whether that vote is either to take them completely out of the budget or to defer them at least until the fall so we have a better idea of where we stand. I just don't want to get in a position where we have some really major reductions in revenue and the only options we have, because a lot of things have already been spent, would be to impacting personnel. That's the last thing I want to do. I don't think any of us really want to do that, and I'd like to put us in the position where that's the last option that we have.
Okay. All right. Any more discussion on Alan's? Yes, Tom. You're mute, Tom. You need to turn on your microphone.
Ann?
So
Ann?
I would,
Ann?
Yes.
I just want to tell you my pea pot is here, so I may have to go.
Okay. Can you wait? Okay. Tom, go ahead, Tom.
so why don't we start the other way? Why don't we say, how much revenue don't you think we're going to get? So we know where we're heading.
Okay. Okay, Judy, let's put this to a vote about reconsidering the vote we took. And so we can get that part done, and then we'll discuss this the rest of it after we talk to the school department. How's that? That work? So I'm going to say all in favor of Mr. Slater's. Pardon me, who's talking to me?
I am Judy.
Yes.
Listen, the reason I voted for this is to get it on the table, to discuss it, to make it the public, whoever is watching, more aware of what's going on.
Okay.
To sit here with our little blinders on when I've got a newspaper article that talks about Newton, New Bedford, Cambridge, Plymouth, Natick. I mean, come on. So
Okay. So we're trying. So at this point, let's vote on whether or not we will reconsider. Well, we will reconsider our vote of last week to accept the budget as it was presented to us. So all in favor? Alan?
Yes.
Bob?
I'm going to vote no. I'll explain later.
Okay, Judy?
yes,
Kelly?
So I don't know what the nature of this vote is, so I'm not clear. I don't know if we necessarily should throw out the budget that we're doing. I just think we need to be more mindful in terms of a spending plan. So I don't really know what to vote on that.
Okay, so if you want to reconsider the vote that we made last week, which was to accept the budget, and then if you say yes, we haven't done anything to the budget, and we can further talk about it and then decide how we want to handle it again. This is just to buy us a few more days or another week or so to have a discussion.
I will conditionally vote yes if we can get a list of discretionary spending. I understand Tom's asked to tell us how much revenue we're going to get, but that's just a shot in the dark. I think that's backwards. I think we should identify what's in the budget that could potentially be discretionary and go that way instead of going the opposite way.
Okay, so is your vote yes?
Conditionally, yes.
Okay. All right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 to the vote is 4 to 1. Do we have that? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your input here. Now I think that Now, we'll put that to rest. We will plan on another meeting. We'll discuss everything on the next meeting, okay? So now the school department is up, and the first thing with the school department was your revolving funds.
Yep, it's Karen.
Hi, Karen.
Yep.
So in the packet, I did give you a lot of information with regards to some charts on the revolving. But what I'd like to do is just kind of go over each revolving fund, give you a little bit of update on the revolving fund and what that particular fund has in it, and also the balances. And then if you have any questions on the chart, we can go over that after.
Okay, great. Tom, do you have pictures of the chart of the?
Is this the file?
Does anybody have slides?
Karen, is that the file?
Did we lose Karen again? Dr.
Joe.
Thompson, can you see the,
Joe, how do you get it so I can put up the slides?
Can you hear me now?
Let me get the presenter in a second.
Hello?
hi, Karen.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We're just trying to put up the slides.
I'm going to talk on the phone so that I don't keep getting kicked off.
Okay.
So
Thank
let
you,
me
Tom.
get-
Thank you, Joe.
So I'm asking Karen, is this the correct file?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to start off by explaining a little bit about what the revolving funds are. Let me get. Hold on one second. I'm getting off there. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Okay. So revolving funds are funds collected for a certain purpose, and unlike the general fund, these funds carry forward from year to year. These funds are expended for the purpose for which they are collected. So, for example, if you have an extended day revenue, it can only be spent on expenditures related to the extended day program. So the update that I've given you is through May 10th. It's the one that I presented to the school committee. And I did a thorough analysis of the review of the revolving funds to date. And I'm going to go over each one. So the first one that I'm going over is the COVID-19 payroll expenditures. So the COVID-19 fund is a fund that was created due to the COVID-19 crisis, and the expenditures and payroll that we felt were directly impacted by the COVID crisis are held in this revolving fund. The current balance is a negative 109,338, and that is climbing. The expenditures include some technology that was needed to assist in the remote learning for students and for the staff to work remotely from home. It also has payroll. It currently holds the extended day payroll from the date of the school closure due to the COVID-19, which was March 13th, with the reasoning being that the revenue stream for this program was halted that day when the program had to shut down. And the program is a self-funded program and does not have the funds to cover those costs. The second one is the custodial overtime. The custodial overtime is the revenue stream is examples like a youth basketball that might be renting some space in the school, and it's used to cover the cost of the custodial overtime for that event. The current balance in that is $2,035. The athletic revolving account. The athletic revolving account has the revenue as athletic gate receipts. The expenditures included some police detail for the event and some line painting for the field hockey. And the current balance in that account is $35,162. You have a summer school revolving account, and the revenue stream for this summer school is the summer school fees. It's used to cover the cost of the summer school teacher stipends and some of the expenses. and that has a current balance of 0 right now. The school insurance recovery, this is a revolving account that was set up for insurance claims. It has the revenue and expenditures for those claims. The current balance right now is $1,742. The only claim that I see in it this year is there was a bus accident. The school books and materials, it's a revolving fund set up for lost books in which a student has to pay for a lost book. The current balance in that is $2,993. The JHN revolving is a fund set up for the revenue that you get for rent at the Savage Center. Some of the revenue that you get at the Savage Center are your extended day rent, which is $6,888.34 a month. You have Enable Early Intervention at $7,130. You have WIC, $697.58, and you have Head Start at $1,310. The revenue again is from these rent, and the expenditures cover some things like custodial supplies, some general maintenance, a small gas bill at the Savage Center, and it also covers a 0.5 full-time equivalency of a custodian, which is about $25,000. For the FY21 general fund, there was an offset of $25,000 in there from this revolving account. So as you can see, the current balance right now is $28,000. So the offset of $25,000 would leave only a little over about $3,000 to $4,000 in that account. The student activities revolving account, that has a current balance of $54,700. And
Karen, I'm
yep.
sorry. Can I interrupt you for a minute? Now, is Nabal still there, or are they closed? And WIC and Head Start, are any of those open at the moment?
I'm not positive on one. I know that the extended day is closed. I'm not sure if WIC and Early Intervention are Head Start. I'd have to check on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I know the extended day is closed.
Yeah, Madam Chair, they are operating. They're just not in the offices right now, and there has been one request from one renter now that we're going to be closed through June to have some relief. We are looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next one, student activities. This is a fund that includes revenue and expenditures for field trips, for fine arts performance fees, and for testing fees, for example, like a PSAT test. The current balance in that account is $54,700. The school bus fees account. The revenue stream from this is the bus fees to pay to ride the bus. The current balance is $513,090, and the FY21 offset for this account is $400,000. So again, if we took out the 400, there was about 113,000 left there. The current balance right now, it's got some expenditures in there. There's a copy machine lease that comes out of that account for the transportation department. We bought some cameras for the special education vans there. That was about $35,000. Then there was some other small miscellaneous in the amount of $3,689. The school athletic user fees, the revenue from the athletic user fees and expenditures, it includes the revenue is from the athletic user fees, and the expenditures included some officials' pay, various athletic expenditures, a cell phone for the athletic director, and some athletic transportation. The current balance there is $45,629, and the FY21 offset for the general fund is $100,000. Chromebook insurance. The revenue stream here, it's $30 per student to get insurance for your Chromebook. It's an optional fee. So if your Chromebook breaks or it needs to be repaired, the insurance will pay for it. If you did not get the insurance, then you're liable for the cost to either replace or repair the Chromebook. The expenditures in here would be parts for the Chromebook, replacement Chromebooks, a hotspot renewal, and some Chromebook software. And the current balance in that revolving account is $42,483. Building rental. The revenue stream here are examples like Norwood Youth Soccer, the basketball, you've got some parking revenue at the high school, and you've got some small walking track revenue. The expenditures included the School Dude software, which is the software that the facilities uses, and various facility expenses for the school buildings. The current balance is $33,815. Extended day. The revenue from the extended fees were cut short, as I indicated earlier, due to the COVID-19 closure. The program was not able to cover all of their payroll and expenditures this year, and thus all the salaries from the COVID-19 closure from March 13th on are being charged to the COVID-19 revolving fund due to the loss of the revenue stream. The program also was unable to cover their rent through January. It was only able to cover the rent through January. So the current balance right now is $1,527. So they still have some rent that they owe. And that's one of the programs that really got hurt by the COVID-19. They did not have the revenue in there to cover a circumstance such as this. The preschool tuition, the revenue is from the preschool tuition fees. Some of the expenditures in there is there's a Rizzo copier at the LMPA that's paid out of this account. There's also a teacher and 2.8 paras salaries that will be coming out of this account, and the FY21 general fund offset is $163,000. The balance currently is $157,951. This was another revolving account that the fees, the revenue stream was cut short for the preschool. As of April, the revenue stream stopped for that account. Music revolving, it's the account where the revenue for the music lessons are put into this account, as well as some donations. If there aren't any donations that go into these accounts and they're restricted donations, then those can only be used for whatever the donor indicated it was for. For example, if they want it for simply instruments at the middle school, it has to be spent for that. The current balance is $31,171, and the FY21 general fund offset for this is $15,000. The drama operational is another of the fine arts revolving accounts. This one is a revenue for the drama fees and also has some donations in there. The general fund offset for FY21 is $15,000, and the current balance right now is $15,567. The other thing I wanted to mention was the athletic revolving also got cut short with the spring season. You're not having the spring season, so that's another one that we may have to watch. Does anybody have any questions on any of the revolving funds that I've gone over?
Anybody? I'm not seeing anything. I do have one question. With the athletic one, and I think it was maybe the music one, do we have anything that we have to pay back parents that have paid fees? Do we need to pay back parents out of any of these funds for fees that they've already paid in advance?
We have paid some of the extended day. We've paid them some refunds. We haven't paid any refunds back on any of the athletic user fees or anything. I haven't. I'll check with Ann if they have, but I have not gotten any indication that there's any more to.
Okay,
Yeah,
Dr. Thompson.
Yeah, we didn't collect spring. Well, we collected checks. We didn't cash checks for spring athletics, and the same for and music is a one time. If they were destined to be in a one time arts program in the spring, we did not collect fees for that either. So no to both.
Okay, Kelly. Kelly.
Dr. Thompson just addressed my question, so we're all set.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson.
Okay.
The one other revolving fund that I have not gone over yet is the circuit breaker. And the circuit breaker is the one that holds the revenue from the SPED reimbursement program. The districts are reimbursed for SPED program costs more than 4 times the statewide foundation budget, up to 75% of the cost above the threshold. It's subject to appropriation. And it's important to note that in the circuit breaker, you have 2 years to spend this revenue. So it carries forward just 1 year, whereas the other revolving funds, the funds carry over from year to year, so you're able to use those funds from year to year. The circuit breaker, you just have the 2 years. And I have applied the revenue that you carried over for the circuit breaker, so that is already applied towards the general fund. So the revenue that you have left in the circuit breaker to date can be carried over. If we want to carry it over, we can carry it over. That obviously would depend on the year end and how much of that circuit breaker you're going to have to use.
Okay. Karen, I think you have
okay.
a question here. Alan?
Thank you. Karen, have you heard anything related to circuit breaker on our fourth quarter reimbursement or anything related to next year, given the uncertainty on revenue on the state side?
I have not heard anything directly from the Department of Education. Obviously, there's some chatter on whether or not it's going to be reimbursed at the full 75%. But there are a lot of meetings that are going to be going on. So I can update you on that when I get more information. But at this time, I have not gotten a confirmation that it's the change. I did email the Eleanor over at the circuit breaker office about this tuition that we are putting in this year to be paid, and if that is going to be able to be used against the circuit breaker. And as of today, I was told yes, it would.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Mm-hmm. You're
All
welcome.
right. Go ahead.
So with the circuit breaker, let me just pull up my notes on the circuit breaker. So the circuit FY20 budget for the SPED out of district tuition, you had $3,423,926 expended to date for your tuition with your encumbrances is $4,802,863. So the available balance right now and is $1,378,937, a negative $1,378,937. As I indicated before, the circuit breaker that I used thus far, which is the carryover amount, was $1,604,970. So we could hold on to that if we can, which I do recommend, considering the fact that special education and the out of district tuition was really one of the ones that caused you to have a larger budget this year. If we do not apply, currently, I'll get into it further when I go over the budget to date, but currently we have a negative balance of $266,887 in the general fund. And that's because I have not applied any more circuit breaker. I only applied the amount that I had to apply. So if we use the current situation where we applied that $266,887, we applied circuit breaker revenue to cover that deficit, then the estimated year-end balance would be $1,831,803. And that's with we have one more quarter coming in, which is, I think it's 500 and something. It's in my other notes when I get to the section on the general fund. And last year, you ended the year with $1,604,093. So that's a difference of $227,710. So again, if we ended the year right now with this update, then that's where you would end that's where you could end with your circuit breaker, and you'd have that much money to carry over to the next year. Does anybody have any questions on the circuit breaker?
No, I don't see any. Go ahead.
Okay. That's what I had on the revolving accounts, unless anybody has any questions on any of the revolving accounts.
I don't see any. So you're all set.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm all set.
Okay. Did we want to move on to the grants now?
Sure.
Okay. So I did give you a spreadsheet as well on the grants. And again, it gives you all the balances. It gives you some categories on what was spent. It gives you the awards that you got and some notes on it, some employee positions. But basically, I just wanted to go over some of my notes, and then if anybody has any questions, then I can answer any of your questions. The spreadsheet on the grants it has the estimates of the grant expenditures and balances to date. This particular update I did to the school committee was as of 4/29, so at the end of April. And the special education grants, which are the IDEA, the early childhood, and in the inclusive preschool grants, there's 3 of those. Those appear to be pretty much expended in full if we add in all the payroll encumbrances for the year. And when I did this report for you, I did add in the payroll encumbrances for the year. So from what I'm seeing, the title grants those are still going to have some money, but they do need a little bit of analysis. The assistant superintendent and the grant manager are going to be looking into these because they have some remaining funds in them. But in order to spend them down, they're going to have to get a plan of action and do some strategy with the grants and maybe do some amendments. So I'm waiting on Patty and Alec to tell me what their plan of action is with the title grants. You have the Title I grant, the Title IIA grant, the Title III grant, and the Title IV grant. You have 4 of those grants. Those are federal grants. And the amount of money that you got for FY20 for Title I, it was $420,157. For the Title IIA grant, it was $84,484. For the Title III grant, it was $55,459, and the Title IV grant, $23,415. They're grants that carry over for 2 years, but normally each year the district has to submit a form to delegate if the district is going to extend it to the second year. But there was important changes due to the COVID-19. So the Department of Ed is going to submit multi-year delegation forms for all the relevant grantees. So if you had any money left, they're automatically rolling these over so that you don't lose the money and it's extended. And these grants are extended. The extension goes through, I believe it's 9/30/2021. Again, with these extensions and the changes, it's important to really look into how you're going to spend these grants, given they have the additional time granted in them. I can give you a little idea of what each grant, the intended uses are on each of the grants. So your Title I grant is to strengthen the core program in your schools, is to provide academic and support services to your low achieving students, to elevate quality of instruction by providing eligible staff with substantial opportunities for professional development, to involve parents and guardians as active partners in their children's education through open, meaningful communication and training. Your Title IIA grant, this is a grant that provides supplemental resources to school districts to improve high-quality systems of support for excellent teaching and leading. So some of the priorities is to increase student achievement and improvement quality and effective PD for teachers, principals, leaders. Title III provides supplemental resources to districts to help ensure that ELL, immigrant children and youth, attain English proficiency and develop high levels of academic achievement in English, assist teachers and administration to enhance capacity to provide effective instructional programs and promote parental, family, and community participation in language instruction programs for the parents, the families, and the communities. The Title IV, the priorities for the Title IV include supporting a well-rounded educational opportunities, support safe and healthy students, and support the effective use of technology. So you see each one of the title grants has a little bit different ways for you to spend it and the uses for those grants. The IDEA SPED Entitlement Grant, this is your largest federal special education grant. Intended use for district in providing eligible students with special education services and activities deemed essential for the student's success in school for the students aged 3 to 21. For Norwood, you use a lot of the the IDEA special entitlement grant for your therapists and for some of your special education paras. A large portion of that grant, almost all of that grant, is for payroll. You also have a safe and supportive schools grant as the priority is to ensure a school that creates a safe, positive, healthy, culturally responsive, and inclusive whole school learning environment. It makes effective use of systems for integrating services and aligning initiatives that promote students' behavioral health. You have a couple of smaller ones. You have an Innovative Pathways grant. You also have a one that the nurse has a grant. You have a Project Lead the Way grant. The Inclusive Preschool grant is the one that is used for special education paras for the preschool program. But that one this is the last year for that grant, so that one will be going away. You have an Early Childhood Special Education grant. That one also is used for special ed paraprofessionals. And let's see if I can see some of the other ones that you have. Basically, that's all your major grants. You might have some smaller ones, but the major grants, it's a couple small, like an I Am Strong grant, Innovative Pathways grants, but the major ones I gave you an update on. So does anybody have any questions on any of these grants, what their uses are, or any further questions on them?
Judy? No? Alan? Bob? No questions? I actually have a question.
Okay.
Judy, you have a question? Judy, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say I have no questions.
Oh,
Karen, thank you for
Okay.
your, this is very, very clear, right to the point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Karen, the last two that you discussed, and I know you mentioned that we're paying some powers out of that I think they were for the early childhood or the preschool. The last two that you mentioned.
You have the Early Childhood Special Education grant. That one has, let's see, that one has a 0.65 of a sped para. You have the Inclusive Preschool grant. That's the one that I indicated is going away this year, and that has this year I think it's 1.35 of a sped paras. Those had to be absorbed into the general fund for the FY21 budget if you're going to retain those paraprofessionals. Some of the other ones that have grant, the positions in them is Title I has 4 teachers and it has a 0.60 of administrative assistant. Title IIA, I believe, has a 0.5 of a teacher. The Title III has some ELL paraprofessionals. The IDEA, the 240 grant, that's the one that has the most of the salaries. That has 10 paraprofessionals. It has 2 tech facilitators. It has a physical therapist, and it has 4.6 occupational therapists in that one. The nurses grant pays for 0.60 of a nurse, 0.40 of an adjustment counselor, and 0.50 of a special education para.
So we have one that is one grant that is going away. It impacts the 2021 budget, right? Is that what I got out of all of this? And what would be, how soon is, okay, so let's go 2022. Do you have any that will be dropping off in your estimation in 2022?
For the state and the federal grants, there's been no indication. They usually give you an indication. For example, this Inclusive Preschool grant, we've known for a couple years now that this is going to be the last year. The last time that there was a kindergarten grant that went away, and that one also, they gave you a little bit of indication that that grant was going away. I think you can expect that you're going to be getting the larger grants, the title grants, the federal grants, the IDEA grants, the 262, which is the early childhood grant. The amount of money you're going to get in that grant is obviously each year, I can't exactly tell you what you're going to get. But when I look at your grants from FY8, I look at FY18 to FY19 and your FY20, the amount of money that you got in each of those grants. And they give and take a little. For example, I'll give you the Title I grant. Your Title I grant in FY18 was $359,980, and then in FY19 it went to $347,577. But then it went up a lot higher in FY20. It went to $420,157. Your IDEA grant, which is that larger special education grant with all the salaries in it, that's been fairly consistent. In FY18, you had $927,250, but then in FY19, it went up to $946,396, and then in FY20, it went up to $948,639. The 262 grant, which is a smaller grant that had just a para in it, that's been very consistent, 27,000 approximately each year, 27,115 in 19 and 27,741. The inclusive preschool grant, which is the one that we're losing this year, was $30,000, and that was $30,000 both in FY19 and FY20.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Karen, thank you so much for all of this information. We really do appreciate receiving it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, what's next on our agenda here? No more questions, correct? Okay. Present budget, in particular, the SPED, not a district costs. Who's going to speak to that? Karen?
I believe I am.
It's the Karen show tonight.
My notes for that one. Hold on one second. Okay. The budget to date, I did a budget to date report, and it's the update was on May 13th. So as of May 13th, your FY20 budget, which is $49,415,540, due to the fact that you had the Munis put in the middle of the year, so January we moved to the new financial system, which is Munis. So half the year we had the old system, and the second half of the year we had the new system. So in order to do a budget to date, I have to estimate the payroll encumbrances, because normally a financial system would do your payroll encumbrances for you, but because we had two different systems, we have to estimate them for this year. So if I include all my estimates for the payroll with the payroll encumbrances, the general fund, as I said, have a negative balance of $266,887. We have plenty of money right now to apply circuit breaker against that negative, so it's not like I'm worried about this negative. One of the other things is that I have all the AP clerks, the secretaries. I have the athletic secretary, the finance secretary, and I have the facilities assistant. They're all going through all the purchase orders right now, asking them to close out any purchase orders that they no longer need, so that we can get a better idea of what funds we're going to have available. So that's the process that's going on right now. So there'll be a lot of purchase orders lists sent to the town in the next week to close out purchase orders that are no longer needed. I'm asking them to do that right now, given the fact with the situation at hand. I want to get them as many of the purchase orders closed as I can. And it also is good to prepare for the end of year, so to get as many of these purchase orders closed as I can. So hopefully with that, then I'm not exactly sure what the balance would be, but I can give an update after we get all those purchase orders closed. As I indicated to you, that circuit breaker, I've only used the the amount of money that he carried over. So I do have the amount of money estimated to have at the circuit breaker at the year end. If the year ended to, as of this report, would be $1,831,803. You wanted to know about the SPED out of district tuition. The tuition that you did for the budget was $3,423,926. That was what you had a offset. I believe it was $1,200,000. Let me just pull that out. $1,200,000. I'm sorry, $2,100,000. And the year to date with the encumbrances is $4,802,863. So your available budget is, if we were just going with the out of district tuition, is negative $1,378,937. So, I mean, obviously there's some other areas that haven't expended all of their money because the out of district tuition is clearly a large negative right now. We can, again, use more of a circuit breaker on this, but given the situation of next year with all the special education out of district tuition you have, I guess it would be my recommendation to try to hold on to as much circuit breaker as you can. And also, given the fact that your offset for FY21, you've increased it to $2,755,000, and in FY20 it was $2,100,000. So that's what I have for the special education out of district tuition as of right now. I did also ask the special education secretary to go through all of her purchase orders, but the out of district tuition, the out of district schools are also servicing the kids, so it's not like we're not paying them; they're still servicing the special education children the similar way that we're servicing in all the other students. They're all doing it virtually with different plans. So we are still paying a lot of these special education tuition bills.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, Alan.
Thanks, Ann, and thank you, Karen, for that presentation. Very thorough, very detailed. So thank you. A couple of questions just on the budget in general, and particularly, because of the schools closing, the accounts for your bus transportation as well as your building maintenance. Have there been any savings there?
The bus contract, we did do we did an amendment on the bus contract for that period of time from the closure till the end of year. There was a savings in that of about, I believe it was about $130,000. However, you had an awful lot more special education transportation this year because of your increase in your special education students. So not only did we have more special ed transportation, we also had more payroll in the van drivers and in the monitors. So we did get a credit there. It kind of offset the increases that you had in the sped transportation during the year. I did keep I'm trying to pay the bus fees out of the general fund. That's why you have a little bit of a larger amount in your bus fees revolving, because a lot of these revolving accounts, there is a little bit of concern about because of, next year, some of the revolving accounts lost some revenue. So I'm trying to keep, for that particular one, I was trying to keep some of the money in that particular revolving account, especially given the fact that you have a $400,000 offset. The other reasoning being that I wasn't sure on what was going on with when we go back to school with what exactly is going to be the bus transportation, because everything's still up in the air. So I guess my recommendation would be to try to hold on to that account as much as it can as well.
Okay, I also asked any idea for building maintenance, whether there could be any possible savings there. What I'm really looking for is whether, in general, there will be some areas in the budget where you have some savings that you could possibly use that to prepay some of the FY21 spend, as we've done in the past.
Okay,
Well, I'll
Karen,
be able to.
Karen, Dave wants to take this.
I'll let Karen answer the question. Then if I can jump in, Madam Chair, that'd be great.
Okay. Go ahead, Karen.
Once I get all these purchase orders closed, because I did have them go through all the utilities, because when I was doing the update, I did notice there was one purchase order that was in a utility that was large, and I talked to them about that one, that they needed to release that one. So they're thoroughly going through all those utilities and some of the other purchase orders. So probably in about a week and a half, maybe, then I'd have a better idea on what money that I'm going to have available. I mean, there were like some of the areas that you might have saved a little money, maybe a little bit on, you don't have as much of the substitutes. The expenditures for the facilities, they are cleaning and stuff. Some of those maintenance charges are going to the COVID, but not all of them. So there may be some areas, but it's a little too soon for me to tell until I get all those purchase orders closed, because right now there's a lot of encumbrances that that's why I wanted them to start closing them, because I need to know if those encumbrances are, like you said, that they're being held, but they're never going to be using them. So I need them to thoroughly go through them. And I have gotten several emails from, some secretaries and with lists. So I'd say in about a week, we'd have a better idea once those are closed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so if I could just kind of in general, I think this goes along with your question, Mr. Slater. We've got two things going on here. One is trying to make sure we end the year on a positive note, and we're in the process of doing that. Hopefully, having some money to maybe pre-spend some money so we can find more savings in FY21. But we're also in a very difficult situation in that, in order to be ready for the next school year, especially when it comes to technology, disinfectants, and things along that line, we really need to be purchasing those now. So we need to, we're going to need to increase our spending on disinfection equipment and supplies. There could be increased bus costs going forward, especially if we have to have some sort of tiered busing going on. Substitute costs if the virus continues and people being sick and trying to cover classes and such. We also need to spend some money this summer, which we're planning to use the CARES Act a little bit for professional development, because we really need to spend some time, although our teachers have done a great job, under dire circumstances with our, distance and remote learning, there is room to grow there, and we need to put some time and effort into that. So we are between trying to make sure we're ready for September because of the supply chain disruptions that are there and the lack of equipment and things. If we don't move quickly this spring, we won't have the ability to have affecting. And that cost is going to go significantly up, because we are going to need to be doing it 2, 3 times, 4 times as much as we have in the past. So it's kind of it's a very unusual circumstance where we are right now. It's very troublesome when you can't predict what August or September are going to look like. So we need to plan a school that basically can flow between totally remote to maybe a blended where people are coming in for a portion of time to being able to come in almost full time. And that sliding back and forth, much like the phases and going back in phases we heard about midday today, the schools need to be in a situation where we can do that on a daily basis. And that is kind of a big challenge for us. And as far as the budget, I was on a superintendent's call the end of last week. We are not expecting budget numbers from the state until July. They are talking about not providing those until the fiscal year has completely ended. So, I draw an analogy of we know it's probably going to rain in June, but we don't know whether it's going to be a drizzle or a deluge at this point in time. We're looking at, will the HEROES Act go any further? Will it offer some release to state and local governments? We don't know that. We don't really know what the how much this, change of what we're doing right now will benefit our economy over the next month or so till fiscal end or through the summer. So there's a lot of unknowns about doing that. We don't know whether it's going to pour cats and dogs or whether it's just going to be a couple quick cloudy days. So it's very difficult.
Okay. Again, thank you, Dr. Thompson. I mean, you've noted that there are a lot of uncertainties, a lot of unknowns all over, whether we get aid from the state, whether we get aid from the federal government, what the situation is going to be, the beginning of the new school year. I mean, they're just things you just can't, it isn't like you can go to the checklist, what we've done in years past and, we know exactly what to do. I mean, the fact is, we're all breaking new ground here. One other thing I wanted to ask you and the members of the school committee that are here is that, and we'll have this similar conversations with general government, is that the budget that we did was a pre-COVID-19 budget. I think we felt comfortable with the numbers that we had at that time. However, situations have changed. We just don't know where we're going to be. I mean, as you pointed out, that we're not going to really know until July what the state budget numbers look like. And who knows, even in July, if we're really going to know what they are. So one of the questions I have is, just looking at your budget and at the number of new personnel that you're proposing, a little more than, I think it's like 15.8 personnel. Most of those are related to ELL and SPED, so you could argue that those are mandated positions. But there are two positions that you designate as other needs. Those are two grade school teachers. Mm-hmm. And my question is, given the budget uncertainties that we have, whether the school committee would strongly consider taking those positions and the associated dollars out of the FY21 budget, because again, we have no idea what we're going to be looking like in August or September. We're going to have in classes, we're going to have remote classes, we're going to have half and half. Nobody really knows. And given the uncertainties we have in our budget, I think it would be prudent to strongly consider removing those two positions from the budget.
Well, I mean, yeah. And again, I don't know whether, needing to be flexible so that we can do multiple. We have held off on posting one of those two positions. The other one was desperately needed this year, where we had 30 and soon approaching over 30 in a classroom in fourth grade. That number is probably only going to increase. So that would be a very difficult situation to deal with. I believe first grade at the Cleveland, which started out at about 22 students, which is much higher than we normally start a first grade class out at. And the Cleveland historically has always added students before we opened. So again, it comes back to the comfort level of people having, mid to high 20s in first grade. So and for fear of sound, so we have looked at what positions we could limp through without. We have not posted those positions. And I mean, trying to budget on numbers that are not real yet is we need to be aware that it's going to rain and prepare for the fact that it might rain, but to develop a budget for, should we sandbag or should we bring an umbrella? So that's where it is. I think we need to be cognizant moving forward and build so we're flexible with our spending and our approach come the beginning of the year. But the other problem is to not have, a viable budget does not allow us to be prepared for the new year. So we can, if we do not have a budget and we go to 1/12, that will, in a normal year, that would be getting us through. But where we are right now, where we have to prepare for tremendous uncertainty and service children in many different ways, it really would be a detriment to what we're trying to do.
Understood, but again, we're talking probably about $100,000 in a $52 million budget. If you feel very strongly that you need those two positions, then all well and good. But whether it's possible that you could absorb those with some reduction somewhere else in your budget, whether it's additional personnel you don't want to hire or anything else. I mean, all I'm really saying is that given all the uncertainties we have with the availability of funding, both at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, any modification to the number, would certainly be welcome. Again, we realize that, this is greater than the 3.5% that was called for in the pledge, primarily because of the ELL and the special education. What we're really talking about, is maybe like 0.2% of a $52 million budget. So I would urge you to, you and the school committee to go back and look at that and see whether you can come back to us with some type of relief.
Well, and like I said to you before, we are not posting and hiring those positions that we think we might possibly have to not go with. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if it's something, if we know that and we know the numbers, then we could adjust accordingly.
Right, and being flexible and aware of that. I mean,
right.
There are things that are in the SOA plan that are replacing pieces of our budget. That if that does not come, at least some, to the tune of 275, we're kind of in a very difficult position because that pushes back into the budget. So being aware of that, there are probably 3 or 4 positions that we are holding off on posting, and we'll probably wait until we get those budget numbers.
All right. I mean, we're going to have to at some point, at town meeting, recommend the budget number. So, we only have a certain amount of time to be able to do that. But I understand where you're coming from. Right.
So, I mean, as soon as the state gives me that number, I'll be more than happy to work on it. But until then, we're just shooting in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the struggle. So it's, the plan is to be adaptive and conservative where we can be adaptive and conservative, but, we can argue about when the time is to react and make those adjustments. But, it's, we're not going to have the numbers in a timely fashion where we're going to have them seemingly at this point before town meeting. So,
well, understood, but
and you're muted. And you're muted.
Oh,
trying to talk. I see you, but you're muted.
And I'll finish. I mean, understood.
Understood,
but we will certainly have to make some recommendations for town meeting. Given the uncertainties we have and looking what other communities are going to be doing. So, I think we're going to have some further conversations on this.
Okay, good. Kelly and then Bob Donnelly, please.
So I appreciate absolutely agree with the spirit of what Mr. Slater's saying, and I do understand where Dave's coming from. I have two points I want to make on this. We to Alan's point, we really can't wait until the state gives us final numbers in order for us to move forward with the budget that we need to vote on and present to town meeting. We just don't have the ability to do that. Just like every organization in the country, the world right now, you have to make projections based on modeling that you do that represents your best guess of what's going to happen. And that's what it is. It's a guess. This is unprecedented times with something that's really never happened before, even with the influenza pandemic that went around in the late 10s and early 20s. That didn't completely shut down a global economy. And this is much different than that. So saying we're going to wait for, the state to commit to what they're going to give us, we don't do that any year. We don't know exactly what's on the cherry sheet when we commit. We don't know exactly what we're getting, and we can't do that now. On the other hand, I do agree with the spirit of going back and looking to see what, like we talked about before, what discretionary spending there is that can be looked at to be held off of. But I would argue, especially the year after override, having 30 kids in a class in a school district that is probably one of the largest percentage of English as a second language learning students is unacceptable. It would be unacceptable for the teacher to control that environment and for the students to get anything out of that class, especially when you're talking of upwards of 30% of the students in that district that are second language learners, are English language learners. So I would argue those positions are just as required as the mandates from special education. I do encourage the school department to go back and look at their budget and see if there are other things that are more discretionary, even if we've always had them, that we could potentially delay and put on a spending plan. I would encourage that. But I would argue that those teachers in classrooms with kids of over 30 kids is just as mandated as sped. Remember, we're servicing in my opinion, we're servicing the entire population, and that includes our children. And to provide them with a quality educational experience is one of the reasons that everyone got out for the override and voted for it. So I'd hate to see that degraded, even in this environment, unless it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Kelly. Bob, you had your hand raised. I'm sorry.
Sure. So my question has to do with, we are dealing in the unknowns. So, but the budget as we prepared it or had prepared it included an additional 1.5 million in revenue from Chapter 70 FY20 to FY21. And I believe the SOA money is in there too. So if the state determines that they are, let's say, for example, do not fund the SOA, does the school department need to pull back those FTEs or those positions that were going to be funded by SOA, or do you have to push them into your budget? I mean, I'm just questioning what is the actual mandate. If the state's saying here's some money, and we're using it for some positions that are mandated, yet they pull the money away, do you still need to fund them?
Yes, so about 275,000 of that, maybe we can get down to 250, would need to go back into the budget, and that's where the problem is.
Right.
Yes.
Is the problem similar in the asking of the additional? Now we're not talking about the SOA. We're talking about the increase in SPED instruction, the 11 plus FTEs there. So my question is similar there. If the funding for that is pulled or not available in Chapter 70, we have a real revenue. Would that have to push down into the budget? Or do you have an opportunity to prioritize that list of 11 positions or so and say you're going to be able to fund X, but not all? Is there any flexibility there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, like I said, there's about 275,000. This is difficult. We only have one small screen on a laptop, but there's 275,000 out of the SOA fund that is actually replacing needed things in the budget, because we can write them as part of the Student Opportunities Act plan. Okay, right. So 200, not all of them are personnel. Some of them are, software and supplies and assessment that we are relying very heavily on now. And to remove those would totally decapitate our ability to do the remote learning that we're doing right now. So if you ask any parent about Freckle or Newsella or any of those programs that we have brought in with the override, we would go back to, not providing instruction and resources to our students. So there's about 275 that would need to go back into the budget. There are things that are in the SOA plan that would be fantastic to have because it would allow us to make a great leap forward with our special ed students. Our percentage of 20.2% is extremely high. And we need to do a good job with those students who need those services, but we also need to get our general ed services to a place where we're not having as many go on to the special ed.
Kelly?
One more point I just wanted to make, thank you everyone for your comments, is that I think one thing that I know we don't segregate revenues in our town, and that when we get money in from Chapter 70 and the government all goes in the general pot and we split it. But I think one thing we have to really keep in mind is, yes, the school department did have an increase in spending, but they're also getting a corresponding increase in their Chapter 78 to cover it. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we start talking about things. They're getting a correspondent revenue bump that basically covers what they're asking for. So I just ask everyone to keep that in mind when we start talking about the budget and how it's increased. It's increased, but the states realize that they have an increased need for services and therefore have increased the amount of funding they're giving them. And they're kind of trying to right-site that in the best way that they can. So I just ask for everyone, just the public, everyone, to just keep that in mind when they see the increase in the school department budget.
Okay. Bob?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
After Bob.
Kelly's correct about that. My questions had to do with that's what they've told us today, and that's what we planned for. But I think the difficulty is, how do we meet those mandates in the event that they're not going to fund the SOA, or they're not going to fund they bring that 1.5, that 1.5 becomes 500,000, or the 1.5 million becomes 200,000. I think there are some really tough consequences there that we need to consider in the event that the state, which does mandate these things, but has been known in the past to mandate such services and not correspondingly provide communities with the necessary resources financially to do it. And we may find ourselves in that position at the end of the day. Hopefully not, but it's a distinct possibility.
Teresa Stewart, please.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Couple thoughts. So bear with me as I try to reconcile all of them and all the concerns that everybody has been raising. Because first and foremost, we hear you. These questions are not questions that we're not already asking ourselves and each other. I talk to them all the time and ask all these hard questions and throw out scenarios, and trying to plan for best case and worst case at the same time is an almost impossible task. And we already collectively, as a general government and school committee, went through the override process. And that was hard and stressful and challenging, but very different in that we did have specific numbers that we were working towards in both best case and worst case scenario. And, almost everybody here today has talked about the level of uncertainty, and there's so much uncertainty. So yes, we need to plan. Yes, we need to project. Yes, we need to model, but how much do we do now versus wait to July 1? I don't know. We're trying to figure that out, and there's pros and cons to everything everybody's saying. But I think it's also really important to understand that we're not just projecting and modeling education in a silo. I mean, so many of these projections are going to be influenced and dictated by what happens with this virus and by public health. I wear a public health hat, and I'm very worried about what Governor Baker decided today, and I'm very interested and concerned to see what happens in the next 2 to 4 weeks based off of decisions that were made today. And based off of the next 2 to 4 weeks, I think that's going to tell us a lot about what our summer looks like. And then based off of what our summer looks like, that impacts our fall. I don't know how we could possibly predict all of that, now today on May 18th. I think that Mr. Slater, when you were saying that we have to come back to the table and have some hard conversations, I agree 100%. But I think, unfortunately, the hard conversation is going to be increased need, not the ability to decrease. Because one of the models that I keep reading about and that I see happening in other countries as they transition back to school is smaller classrooms. So smaller classrooms may mean more teachers, not less. Or is it a team teaching model? Or is it a staggered classroom model? Like, there's so many models out there that are being looked at, but I think they increase resource need, not decrease it. And that's a hard conversation that we're going to have as a community. And I think another really hard conversation we're going to have as a collective community is around our student need, because most of you have heard me say this before, but the needs of our students right now are skyrocketing in terms of mental health and emotional well-being. I mean, this is a collective traumatic situation that our students are going through, and it's not going to end at the end of August. So I know I'm not giving you like concrete answers, but just to share a little bit of how I'm thinking about this and the articles I'm reading all the time, the research. You know, Ms. Langoon was sharing the article in the paper that she was reading earlier today. I get an update every day, Monday through Friday, from the MASC with news articles of the challenges that the other districts are going through. So we're aware of them. And then I'll just lastly share, you know, we do have a budget subcommittee scheduled for Thursday. We meet regularly as our budget subcommittee. You know, the way we tend to operate is we address some of these harder topics initially in our budget subcommittee and then bring it back to our fuller committee. So even though you haven't heard these conversations happening in the full committee, they are happening at our subcommittee level so far.
Thank you. Let's see. Mark Good, are you still here?
I am, yes.
Mark, have you gotten any kind of updates or anything from the state about what you should do about projecting revenues or anything? Is there anything that we need to know that would sort of help us along in this conversation?
Well, I think there's a lot of uncertainty out there, as everybody was saying. The legislature is not meeting until later on. I don't think they're going to address the budget until later in June or maybe even July. We know they're throwing out some numbers revenue-wise that will not be coming in. What does that mean for us in terms of Chapter 70 money, the general government? You know, a 3% or a 20% reduction in those two categories is about $3 million. Is 20% too much? I don't know. Who knows? So I think it's what everybody's been saying. It's uncertain in general. But we do know that hotel tax, meals tax are not coming in this third quarter. So April, May, June is going to be, you know, $500,000, $500,000 that will not come in unless June turns around. But it certainly doesn't look like that. If it doesn't turn around July, August, September, you're looking at $500,000 for that quarter as well. So I just don't have any, like everybody else, no firm numbers.
Okay, thank you. Tony, did you have your hand raised?
I did, thank you. There's just a couple of things I wanted to mention. To Teresa's point, all things being equal, it's going to cost us more to operate the school department next year and more to operate general government than it did a few months ago. So I know we're worried about the revenue side changing, but the cost of operating government is going to be more next year than it was this year. So for being realists, budgets actually should be going up because it's going to cost us more no matter what we do. Just to do the same things that we're doing, there's going to be an increased PPE cost, there's an increased cleaning cost. We can cover some of the immediate costs with CARES Act money, but there's going to be replacement costs as we go along for new procedures and new equipment and the additional use of supplies. The school department in particular, if you think about it, they lost 4 months of education time. And I don't know what the learning loss delta is. I'm sure that's Dave's sort of category. But when you've lost so much time going into next year with less resources, even adjusting for COVID expenses just isn't going to work. I mean, if we went 4 months without any police patrol services, I would need 10 or 20% more to catch up after 4 months of simply not doing it or doing it at 20%. The other side of the question we have to look at is, I understand that FinCom has concerns that we're going to go into a fiscal year and revenues may not match up. We can always adjust our budget as we go if needed. On the revenue side is where we should first look for a couple of reasons. One, somebody, I think it might have been Kelly mentioned earlier, the override. We just raised everyone's taxes 10% last year. I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers to say, we raised your taxes 10%, let's now reduce your services. And I know Alan's talking, look at discretionary expenses. Well, very little of what gets done is actually discretionary. And I know Alan jokes, and he's right, it's the paperclip account, and he wants to see more than that. But that's really all that is discretionary, is the paperclip account, if you will, because our money is tied up in bodies. There's a few things here and there you can clip and chip. But even if you go through and do all those, it's marginal compared to the whole budget. I mean, to Alan's point, he said, maybe you can find $100,000 savings in a $52 million budget. You can, it's really marginal. How much energy do you spend on the margin? In terms of the revenue side, two things to remember. One being, we're already predicting only 91% of local receipts. So we're in a fairly good place there. It could drop more, but that's a fairly good revenue projection going in. And the big question is state aid. The states never cut Chapter 70 aid. School districts have always been held harmless. Now, that could mean that we don't get that $1.5 million increase that we had this year. But for Chapter 70 to take a hard cut, it's never happened in the history of the Commonwealth. Now, these are unprecedented times, so that doesn't mean it won't happen. But there are districts out there known as minimum aid districts where they never really get anything new a year, but your dollar amount never actually goes down. If we're worried that the revenues won't match up, you first look at some of the larger expenses and what we're doing. And there's a couple of things I want to remind everyone of. One of them is we're putting, between the override stabilization and the regular stabilization, we're putting $1.1 million into the bank. So in what world do we put a large amount of money into the bank, but also cut services? It just doesn't make sense. And we want the override to last as long as we can, but why do we pass the override? To try to balance services. To that point, there's $1.2 million in the override stabilization account. Now, I don't want to run and spend the money in the override stabilization account, but right there's almost $2.5 million between those two items because we didn't pass an override to then go cut the school budget. It just doesn't make sense. And I can't see how we go to the public and say, well, we have money in an account that we set aside to not have to reduce the school budget or the budget as a whole, but we're going to keep it in there and then go reduce the budget. We also have $500,000 pension catch-up, which is a good thing. That's a very good thing. We should be doing that. But do we go not fill a position on the school side and catch up on the pension? I mean, the fiscal conservative in me says, of course, always catch up on your pension system. But if you look at what we're putting into the two stabilization accounts, plus what's in the override stabilization account, plus the pension catch-up, that's over $2.8 million. You allocate $1.5 million of free cash, we're talking about a massive cut in state aid and local receipts absorbed right there. Now, is that sustainable over the long term? No, but then we would have funds available for the FY22 budget. And then it's FY23 where we're slowly able to start making adjustments as time goes on and giving the economy time to reopen. We don't know what the economy is going to look like. We don't want to go forward and then go back, but it's possible by the first or second week of August, everything could be back open. It's possible we could be sitting here next year still not being able to go in a bar and having a drink. But the governor did announce today what I consider to be a fairly aggressive plan for reopening. So phase phase 2 starts in a couple of weeks, and then it moves on to phase 3, phase 4. By the middle of July, I think technically by 4th of July, we could all be sitting in Lewis's having a drink. So I'm not predicting the economy's going to all of a sudden snap and get better. But remember, we're looking at a month or two before whatever the new normal is. There'll certainly be some after effects. But there's a lot of, on the revenue side, items out there that I can't see the value or the logic in cutting the budget and reducing services when we have these other options available. These are all good financial things you do so that when you face an issue like this, you have flexibility without having to reduce the services. I don't see how the school department reduces services even by a dime because they've lost 4 months of educational time. And the teachers have done a great job, but the kids are spending only a couple hours a day in front of a screen, and I don't know how they do it. I can't go cut public safety. In the middle of a pandemic, the people responding to it when it's going to cost more just to do what we've always done. And then now we have even more to be done. I just don't think that that's a rational solution. I understand the concern, but I think there's some big ticket items and there's some revenue items and some fund balances that we need to look at first, which gives us the flexibility to to be able to move forward with the budget because we won't know for sure for a few more months. And I think that's always what we got to hit first before we start reducing services to the public, even if we hadn't had an override last year in the middle of an emergency. You add on the fact that we raised everyone's taxes last year 10%. I certainly have no desire to go to the public and say, well, we raised your taxes 10% last year. This year, your taxes are still going to be the same, but I'm not paving as many roads. I just don't think that that's a wise fiscal path. And I think that the idea that we'd reduce services in the middle of something like this is a dangerous idea. And I go as far as to say dangerous when we have these other options. If we didn't have $1.2 million in override stabilization, if we didn't have $1.1 million going into the bank, if we didn't have a $500,000 pension catch up, if we didn't have $3.5 million in free cash, sure, I'd be saying we're looking at just throwing a lot of blood on the floor. But I think we need to look at the services we're providing and look at a stable option to get us through until we understand truly what the new normal is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mizuko. Anyone need to comment?
Yes.
Are you raising your hand? Okay. Bob Donnelly first, I guess.
Sure. I know, geez, we're stealing Dave's thunder here. We're off, but because this is not related to school. I think more towards Tony. So with the reserves, the backup plans, if you will, with free cash and so forth, just mechanically, I'm curious as to how they would be affected. I mean, we have free cash available. It's sort of like a reserve, but it technically would not be appropriated to any particular line item. So if we find ourselves in need of utilizing those reserves, mechanically from a town meeting, a legislative perspective, how do we do that?
So there's two ways you can do it. You can either make the decision at the annual town meeting in June, at which point you have the free cash there, and whether you make the budget transfers. One other option is you can wait until the fall, and then before we go to set the tax rate, so we might have a slightly earlier town meeting, maybe a late September town meeting. We say, okay, we now need to come up with $3 million in revenue. How do we do it? These are the funding sources for it. These are sort of to the point, Alan's point about discretionary expenses. I wouldn't say these are discretionary, but you hold off on making the fund balance transfers. Even if you made them, you just unmake them. You got the pension fund. Once you cut that check, that's gone for good. But in a September town meeting, you would say, okay, we're reallocating that 1.1 million. We're reallocating and taking 1.2 million out of here. We're taking X from free cash and we're reallocating it. These are really the items that you have that flexibility. Now, the true stabilization numbers, you don't have to do that now. You could do that in the fall. You put it in, you take it out. You just don't make the appropriation. But those are also, so you can mechanically do it in the fall. We can also make these changes in the annual. If you make them at the annual and you don't need to do them, you'd be unmaking them at the fall, which you can still do. The free cash or the stabilization gets appropriated to offset the tax rate, even though you're not really offsetting the tax rate. But there's an allocation in the budget to reduce the overall expenditure, so the budget balances out. So we could do it now or we could do it then, and there's no harm waiting until then to make the changes, unless we want to say, well, hey, let's allocate this 3 or 4 million, and then you look at it in the fall and say, okay, well, it only needed to be 2.7 million, so here's what we'll do. Let's take 1 million and throw it back into stabilization. Make those decisions then, or you can make them in June. It's not that complicated. It's a little complicated.
Okay. Judy?
Yeah. I mean, it all sounds well and good. And Tony, you make a very good case. However, it's going to be harder in the fall if we're short. We can go with a little pain now, not fund some things, and then later on, we might be a little better off. If we wait, we could be bleeding and dying. Right now, we don't have a crystal ball, but that crystal ball right now is pretty dark. And I think moving forward with a pre-COVID budget and saying, oh, don't relax, everybody. Everything's going to be fine. We've got $1 million here and $1 million there and da. Well, what are we going to do for fiscal 2022? And then 23. We're going to get into the hole. That's where I'm coming from. This is sort of a proactive thought process. And to tell you the truth, if we pass that budget, people are going to spend it. We're not going to be conservative. We need this, we need that, and away it goes. So I'm a little bit more conservative. I think we should wait. When I look at this newspaper article, we're talking about Brookline, Native, Natick, Plymouth, New Bedford, Cambridge, Newton. I mean, they're all looking at it now and not hiring people. And I would hate to hire some people and have to lay them off, or hire those people and say, well, we need the new people more than we need the old people. So let's, lay off the old ones. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe it's just close our eyes, hold our nose, and say go, and just ignore the whole thing, and we'll approach it in the fall. That's one option. I'm uncomfortable doing that.
Okay, I have a couple of people with their hands raised. Kelly first, and then Teresa. Thank you.
So, I completely, I agree with what Judy's saying. I mean, it's a very difficult time. Obviously, unprecedented revenues are going to be lower everywhere. The government is no exception. That said, Tony's point is very well taken. The reason you have reserves is not to just keep them in stockpile. The reason you accumulate reserves is to get you through unforeseen circumstances. And that's why you should never increase your budgets because you have a good revenue year. And you should never give money back if you have excess taxes back to people. You should save it because the economy is cyclical. Take this virus out of it. The economy in and of itself is a cyclical thing that goes up and down and wanes based on what happens in the environment around them. There are good times where you have extra, and there are bad times where you have less. And that's why you plan for the bad times by accumulating reserves, and you have them in the background so that you can get yourself through the hard times, back into a good time, and accumulate those reserves again. So I agree that we have to be very, very careful about that. And I agree with the spirit of what Judy's saying 100%. But I honestly don't think the impact of this financially is going to hit us until the following year, to be honest. And I think making blanket cuts in the short term based on having an override in the previous year that the public has overwhelmingly told us that they want these services provided to them, especially within the schools, I think that might be going a little too far. I think, like Tony said, if we can wait a couple months and see what happens, and if we have to make cuts, then we have to make cuts. But I think the reason we accumulate reserves is to get us through times like this, and that's why they're here. So I don't want us to go into draconian mode pretending that none of that stuff exists, because that's what it's here for.
Wait a minute, Teresa, and then Bob.
Yeah, thank you. So just a couple quick things. So again, I hear everything everybody is saying, and I would ask that you continue to collaborate and trust us. And I mean, we've been attending FinCom meetings in a very different way than we have in the past for hours. And we've been very transparent, and Ms. Sheridan is amazing in the level of detail in her work that she has been presenting to us as a school committee, and that we have also been bringing to you. I think that, our budget subcommittee is the people who are here on the phone with you, on this meeting with you tonight, Maya and Dr. Thompson and Karen and I. And I think we have every intention of continuing to be transparent. And, if you're asking us the questions, we will, A, we're probably already asking them ourselves, but B, we will continue to find answers and share that information with you. So that's the first point I think. The second is, I think it's so important that all of us in our community really reflects and keeps in mind what a school system does, because it's not only the academic education. And I think that as horrible as this pandemic is, it's really highlighting the value and the needs that are met through a school system. Kids need to be fed, and we have stepped up and we've done that. And, in collaboration with the town as well, through the Wednesday meal program and the food pantry, but the schools have played a critical role in ensuring that our kids still are fed. The schools meet the mental health needs of students through our adjustment counselors and our psychologists. Kids who have IEPs and 504s, schools help them get the OT and the PT and the speech that they need. So when the school buildings are closed, part of the reason we're talking about the challenges and costs maybe increasing is because those needs still have to be met. These children, and that's my number one goal on a school committee, student achievement and the well-being of our kids, these needs don't go away. Schools offer, a physical and an emotional safe place for kids. That has to be a priority in all of this. School nurses are helping children with their healthcare needs. And like it or not, in our society, de facto, schools also offer childcare. And, you know, this pandemic is so hard right now on so many parents because all these things that I just rattled off have been drastically shifted. And whenever we go back to school and in whatever form we go back, all of these are things that as a school committee and as an administration, we are tackling in addition to and as equally to the education component. So I just wanted to express that. But then, Sarah, just a quick question, Ms. Haley, for you and the FinCom. You mentioned very early on in the meeting, you know, that you did take that vote to reconsider the budget, which I understand and respect, and that you'll come back at another meeting. Do you have a sense, just so on the school committee side, we can figure out timelines on our end too, do you have a sense of when you would meet again, what you would be looking for, any sense of then what you would be asking the school committee to produce after that?
I think that we would probably need to meet Monday, if everybody was available on Monday. And I would actually probably see if we could just as not have any invited guests. Now, obviously, if anybody wants to show up, you may. We will enjoy having you, but just to get ourselves, to talk through things ourselves and see what we can come up with and what kind of decisions that we can come to help us decide where we, as a committee, want to. That's my suggestion, but we'll see what else is going on. But I would say Monday if I don't hear anybody saying no.
And Monday is Memorial Day, so that's a holiday.
I forgot.
We might want to do Tuesday.
Okay. Okay. We can take care of that after the rest of the things going on here. I had Bob, and then I had Judy with comments, and then Alan, and then Kelly again. Okay. Bob, Judy, Alan, Kelly.
So, you know, I'll speak as the member who did vote not to reconsider the budget, just as a way of explaining my thoughts. And perhaps it's because I'm a middle child, I'm taking a middle of the road position here. But, you know, I voted Thursday in favor of the budget as it was submitted. I thought that there were enough conditions financially to support paying for ongoing expenses, given our changes to free cash and other things that Tony had spoken about. So that's really the you know, I haven't really felt the need to move. However, I do see that there is a good opportunity here based on our vote to not necessarily identify areas that need to be specifically cut. But if we're talking about being able to see a clearer picture in the fall, I can certainly see a rationale for the school department as well as general government to come up with ideas on not just paper clips and discretionary spending, but perhaps some bigger ticket items that could be deferred at least for a portion of the fiscal year, perhaps through the fall meeting, so that by that time we have a better idea of what our revenues are, and then be able to take those deferred services, if you will, and carry on with them for the remainder of the fiscal year. So those are the kinds of things that I think we can do. I'm taking a middle of the road position here that I do believe that the budget that was initially passed is sufficient. I have faith in that. I understand the FinCom's interest in looking at areas of spending that we should examine further. And if we can do that and be able to come up with a plan to defer some of that spending to a later part of the fiscal year, then I think that's a plan we should look at as well.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Who was next? Judy? They have Judy next? Yep, Judy, go ahead.
Okay, look, we can make an argument for any approach here because of the unprecedented time. My whole purpose was to put on the table being proactive rather than being reactive. We know what has happened nationally by doing that. Other cities and towns are trying to take proaction with the same information that we have. I hate to say, let's just trash everything and just go in and start cutting. But I have to have a sense of whether people believe in recognizing that this is a major issue and needs to be looked at. Not that, oh, the kids need everything. And this is not just a school issue. This is the town side too. So just because we're meeting with the schools and we brought this up, we don't mean it's just the schools. But I've been around long enough to have seen a lot of this in the past, and then we were sorry later, and then we had to cut more because we didn't do things more upfront. So I could make a case to say, okay, let's go, let's see what the fall brings, and then bring out all the, the reserves, and then we can spend them. If anybody thinks this is a 2021, 22 problem, it's going to be beyond that. 22 is going to be very, very hard, even if we could come up with all the funding for 2020, 21, 2022. Remember, we still have another, month and a half to go in this particular fiscal year. We're not sure we're going to have all the revenues. We'll have to take reserves out of that too to finish out this fiscal year. So I guess I'm just being overcautious. And I think you've all made some very good points. I think putting these points on the table shows people we come from different views, and hopefully we'll come up with one plan.
Okay, Alan, I think you were next.
Okay, thanks, Ann. First of all, I want to make it clear that I've heard the term draconian used. I don't think anything that I'm interested in, on either side, whether it be the general government side or the school side, could be considered as draconian. My big concern is that, you look at where we are, and again, we have absolutely no idea what the situation is going to be in any level of government, how much money we're getting at any level. And I don't want to get into the position where, we fund a pre-COVID-19 budget, and then we get to the fall and it's like, oh my God, we're not getting X, we're not getting Y and whatever. And then we take so much money out of our reserves that we leave us little flexibility for FY22 and FY23 when there may be other hits to the budget and we don't have any reserves or limited reserves to make up the difference then. That is a real issue with me, and I think it's something that we have to strongly take into consideration when we finalize the FY21 budget. It is a little concerning to me that there are people, and I understand where they're coming from. Everything is uncertain, that it's sort of like, let's continue where we are and let's see what happens and hope for the best. I'm not going to be an optimist. I'm not going to be a pessimist. I'm trying to be a realist of how we look at things. And again, given the uncertainty, I think that, we should go into this final stages of the budget, with somewhat of a more conservative point than we did back in January and February, and then taking the reality into consideration when we make our final decisions.
Okay, thank you. Kelly. Okay, Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Ed. So I completely agree with what everyone's talking about. I mean, I think two things that would be helpful right now. I know that there's uncertainty, and everyone's pointed to that. That is obvious. There's uncertainty everywhere. There's uncertainty in the economy. There's uncertainty in people's jobs outside of this. There's uncertainty of our food supply. There's uncertainty everywhere, right? But you have to be able to model and plan. And so if we really want to model and plan what the potential reserve impact could be, if we end up in a situation where we get less revenue, let's model that. Let's take our revenues, instead of saying we're going to get 90, let's drop it down to 80. What happens if we get 80% of our revenue? How much of our reserves will we have to spend this year? And if we get 70, 80 the next year, how much more of our reserves will we spend? And model this out, because I completely agree. This isn't a one, or to Judy's point, this isn't a 1 or 2 year issue. We're talking about a 3 to 4 year issue potentially for the full recovery of this. And whether or not the state supports us through that or not is much up to how the state's doing financially as well, which will most likely be in the same position we are. So we probably will not be supported on that level. Let's model out. That's the one thing I really haven't seen, is that modeling that out. So if we say, yes, we're going to agree to this budget, and because it's what's needed right now, what do we expect to take out of reserves in this year if our revenues are 80%? What if they're 70%? What if they're 60%? What if they're half? And we do out that model. And if we get to half, we're all screwed. Let's just be honest about that. But let's do that model out, assuming that's happening for 3 to 4 years, and to see what the ultimate impact on our reserves is. I think that would be a very prudent conversation to have, because to Alan's point, you don't want to get in a position where in the first year you blow through all your reserves, and then you got nothing left for the subsequent years. And then, to Alan's point, then you are making draconian changes. You're just cutting huge blocks of money from the budget, which we don't want to do. So I would love to see that analysis done. Second thing is one more thing. And second thing is I would still feel comfortable moving forward with this budget. But what I would like to see before doing that is a spending plan. What is our cash flow and spending throughout the year? What, like we've talked to, everyone's talked to, what can we delay hiring right now? What can we push off? What do we not have to expend right now? And have those expenses be conditional on us having revenues to meet them. And we can agree with what that is, what that revenue looks like, whether it's reserves or actual revenue intake from our various sources. But I think that would be extremely helpful to see what we actually can control should a bad situation happen. And I think those two things would be super important and impactful.
Okay. First of all, to the first part of your observations there, Kelly, my suggestion for our next meeting would be something similar to what you were asking, planning, and that, okay, see what we think would happen with a 80% of using 80% of our revenue, used to be expected revenues. I'm sure we're not going to make what we had expected to make. So let's do something similar to what we had done when we did the override, and look at different numbers, look at them a little differently than what we have been looking at, and see where we come out, and see what we would have to do to meet those other numbers. That was sort of in the back of my mind as a plan for our next meeting. What was your second point? I'm sorry. Kelly, huh? You don't remember?
Sorry, my second point is to have a spending plan. So one thing that's really important in planning is your budget, but the other is cash flow. When your expenses coming in and out, that's super important. And I would actually argue in this fiscal year, for companies and probably for the government, your cash flow is more important than your actual revenues. Of course, if they don't drop considerably, but your cash flow is super important, because you might have revenues booked against, but if you don't get that cash in and you can't meet your expenses, then you have a significant issue. So I would love to see a spending plan as well.
Yeah. Anyway, so the spending plan, as you call it, that's another thing that we need to discuss, in that how are we going to do that? Is that going to be in a format of a memorandum of understanding between the general government and the school department? Or is that, how are we going to handle something along those lines? Because when we go to town meeting and we pass that budget, that, as Judy has said a number of times, that becomes their spending plan. And we can ask them to be frugal or prudent with their spending plan, but how they spend it is up to them as soon as town meeting passes that budget. I would expect, because they're professional people and they are very bright and talented, that they would be frugal and have a spending plan. But there are some lines basically that we couldn't cross, and so you have to understand that once it's passed, and whatever, okay, so I've got hands here. Okay, first, I guess Kelly, you first, and then
So
Mr. Mizuko.
So I guess the thing I would say to that is I'd say two things to that. I think one, I think the level of meetings that we all do together now is so elevated from what happened, from what I've heard in the past, where we're getting together as a group of committees and talking more than I think has ever happened in the town of Norwood, which I think is fantastic. And there's a level of respect and trust I feel that's been built between all of the team members, which I feel in interacting with any of them, even if I disagree. I feel like everyone treats each other respectfully and is all coming from the place to try to make the town better and really wants to be accountable for the decisions they make. And I think that's fantastic. So I think that would help with people spending money if we approve something that we didn't have. That said, as much as I don't like the idea of doing a 1/12 budget, maybe that makes sense to do that if we're really that concerned about what's going to happen and what the future is going to hold. I was not crazy about the idea, and I know we've spoken about it. I talked to you about it. But if that's really, we're really, really concerned, which it makes sense, completely logical to be concerned, maybe it makes sense to do that so we can be more reactionary in our planning.
Okay. Next, I have Tony and then Dr. Thompson. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, if the committee wants, what we can do within the next couple of weeks is we can get you sort of whether it's a menu list of options or some of the modeling that Kelly spoke about, that, okay, here's where we are. And, you know, if this is the reduction, this is how we'll do it. If it's here, here's how we'll do it. If it's here, here's how we'll do it. And then what we anticipate the next 3 years being as a result of that. I mean, we could say that let's throw up $4 million out of different reserves and different funds. And then if it comes up that we have, we only need to use 2.5 of that, well, then that $1.5 million is available for a subsequent year. So we can get you sort of what that would look like and what those ideas will be based on. I mean, we wouldn't project a 50% cut in local receipts because not only would that, probably unable to achieve, but we can say, all right, we're at 91%. Here's what 80% looks like. And here's what school aid looks like as of next year. And as a result, it's these dollars. Here's how we would pull them. If going to the following year, those were flat, here's projected expenses, here's projected revenues, and here's projected reserves to cover it. And then what it would look like for sort of that third year. So we can get you something if you give us just a few weeks to work on something.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Thompson?
Yeah, I would warn against a 1/12 not approving a budget. That would only last for us until October. Otherwise, we would not be able to pay our teaching staff when they come back. It also would not allow us to deal with the supply chain disruptions and having things that we would need to start the year. So, between those two factors, I mean, 1/12 budgets are put in place. If for some reason you can't have a town meeting, or in the regional schools, town meetings do not agree, it really is not a viable option for schools should we open, or if we're going to teach children in September. So I just want to throw up that caution flag.
Okay, I think I had somebody else before you, Kelly. Teresa?
Just a question. A lot of what we're talking about, what is the role, if any, in this type of work and in this type of analysis with the BBC? So I guess that's open to anybody, or Maya, as chair of the BBC. Does the BBC need to reconvene?
Personally, I would be happy to see the BBC reconvene.
Excuse me?
Yes?
What would be the purpose of the BBC coming back to order? Because that's an advisory committee only. It reports to the town, but it is advisory to the Finance Commission.
I would say to build basically what Kelly said, a spending plan, and to see what Mr. Mizuko would come forward with, as he just said he would have in a couple of weeks. I think Maya wanted to speak. Did you?
Well, I was just going to say that if people do want to reconvene the BBC, we can do that. And I do think that it's possible that the BBC has a role in this, because typically the BBC is involved in determining revenue projections and agreeing to the general spending plan. But I also am curious about, what our mechanisms I guess let me back up a little bit. I agree with a lot of what people are concerned about here, that, our revenues are unknown, our expenses are unknown. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's hard to make real decisions right now. But I also recognize that just the mechanics of, we have town meetings scheduled in about a month. The school committee is not meeting this week. And in fact, it's too late now to post a meeting for this week. We are meeting on May 27th, and we're meeting on June 3rd. But that doesn't give FinCom a lot of time to react if the school committee were to do something, or, and I'm willing to call a BBC meeting, but we also are starting to run out of time for some of these things. So I just wanted to throw those issues out there.
Okay, I think I see Kelly again.
Teresa wants to speak too.
I'm sorry, everything keeps moving on me. Teresa, was that you?
So no, I just wanted to throw out that question for discussion.
So
Okay, go ahead.
Can I say two things? One, to address Maya's thing, and then I had one other thing I wanted to say before. So I agree that the BBC is very valuable. I guess my concern in that would be twofold. One is timing. Obviously, we're moving closely to town meeting, and it might be difficult to get that convened. Two is that the entire, the BBC met just weeks ago and approved the budget to move forward when the situation was going on. And then when we met as a finance group, we then had concerns about it, and not everyone in the finance group obviously is on the BBC to address their concerns. So I feel like we'll just end up in this situation again, where even if the BBC approves something, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone on the finance commission is getting their opinions vetted. So I think that's obviously a concern, because obviously 2 or 3 weeks ago, BBC met, you agreed to pass the budget, it came to the FinCom, and now there's a lot of questions about it, right? So I wouldn't want to add an extra step that adds extra time, and also just ends up sending you back to the BBC every single time, because not everyone on FinCom's getting their questions vetted in that forum. Okay, so that's my first thing. Secondly, I want to go back to something that Judy said to make sure that we're clear. Obviously, the school department is meeting with us right now, and they are taking the brunt of these questions, which I appreciate greatly, and they're handling it with a lot of grace, which I appreciate. But I want to make sure that everyone realizes that when we're talking about cuts and making cuts, it's not just cutting school stuff. In fact, we could make a decision not to cut anything on the school side, and to Tony's chagrin, we could decide to cut stuff on the town side, because that could be more valuable or something that the community wants more. I don't know what that looks like, but I want to just make sure everyone understands this isn't solely focusing on the schools having to go back and tell us what's discretionary. We need that on both sides, and then we need to make a decision as a community. If we get in this situation, what are the services that the community values the most? What are we going to move forward? And then what services do they value least? Because they're all valuable, or else we wouldn't do them, right? We wouldn't provide services if no one liked them. But when you're doing things like this, you have to stack rank things as to what's most important versus least valuable. And that's how we'd have to cut them. And that would go across both. It wouldn't be unilaterally the schools or unilaterally the government. And I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Thank you, Kelly. Bob Donnelly first, and then I think we're back to Tony.
So I guess my question right now is more for Tom and Tony. Yes, we do have a town meeting scheduled for sometime in mid to late June. Just from a logistical perspective, I think we need to talk about the dates that we need to solidify the budget, materials and so forth. So, we're talking about a lot of activity here that sounds kind of aggressive for the timeline that we have. So when, Tom, do we need to finalize a budget so you can get budget books out to town meeting members?
June 1st.
Less than 2 weeks.
That's what I think.
It's
because the printer needs a week, and I need some time after someone makes a decision. So that's a week and a half, and then town meeting's got to get the books. So, and they like to get them 2 weeks before town meeting. I don't think they're going to get that, but June 1st probably.
I think the date that was that I saw was June 22nd for town meeting. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. Pull up my calendar. Don't anybody raise their hand for a minute. Okay, 1, 2, yeah.
So if you decide by June 1st, then, I'm gonna get the stuff to the printer probably the 4th. And then he needs a week, it'll be the 11th. And then we need to get it to town meeting members. So they're gonna get it about a week in advance, even if we go to June 1st.
Okay.
I personally just, everything we're talking about is requiring a lot more time, effort, and analysis than the calendar gives us. So I would advocate for us to be as efficient as possible as to identifying areas that either we want to hold spending on or defer. I think that at this point we may be biting off more than we can chew if we want to get a balanced budget recommendation to town meeting by early June.
So Bob, does that mean that you're not in favor of going to through the budget balancing process, committee process?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mizuko?
If you want to look at just some modeling of, here's a projected cut in revenues and here's what it would be and here's what would be available in subsequent years, we can do that fairly quickly so that everyone can say, okay, if we're looking at this change in the revenue situation and here's how we would make it up. The expenditure cuts, the discretionary cuts, where that becomes a little bit more difficult is you'll spend almost as much, if not more time on a smaller dollar amount. And that really starts getting into, you have to get all your department heads together and say, okay, is $10,000 in the library really discretionary? Well, if we don't do it this year, we're going to do it this year. Okay. Same thing on the school side. All right. If we don't do this project, we move over here. And that's where the smaller dollars are. So if you just want to look at a couple of options on paper, and that makes sense. I mean, I threw out numbers and said, well, you take $1 million from here, take $500,000 from here, and take a couple $100,000 from here, and that looks great. So if you just want to see big picture, those revenue changes, and then how it might look in subsequent years, we can get that fairly quickly and easily. To Ms. Numi's point about the cash flow, we're generally very good on cash flow compared to most communities, mainly because of the light department. We always have money flowing in and out. We can do a more detailed cash flow analysis, but that's not a priority it's not a big concern for us now. So if we put that sort of off to the side, if we hold for a minute on a more detailed discretionary spending, because the challenge with that is not that it's not there, but you take an elementary school, 90 some odd % of the cost of that elementary school is the teachers in the school. The principal can say, all right, we don't need to do this or that. On the general government side, your two biggest operating departments, public safety, occupy more than half the budget. The same thing, once you have 60 firefighters and 60 cops, so much of that is there. So we can really get into the weeds, but you're going to spend a lot of time in the weeds with, all right, we're going to, reseal the lot with crack. Don't have to do that. Great, we saved $7,000. By the time you've gotten 6 people together to come together and make that decision, you've spent $500 in government payroll to save $1,000. That being said, if you want to just look at a fairly straightforward modeling of if revenues change by X, here's the impact next year, and then here's what we think it might impact the next 2 years, we can get you a couple of those options fairly quickly because we really know that there's 2 revenues that are going to change. It's state aid and it's local receipts. I mean, if you want to get into the detail of do we think, meals tax is going to change by 12% versus 9% on the hotels, that's going to take us till July to get. But if you want to just take the total local receipt number and say, let's predict it at 85, 80, 75, and here's the net impact. Here's state aid at, half of what they were going to give us at last year's number and a reduction of next year's number. And then here's how we would fill that with the reserves. And if we do A, B, and C, here's what reserves would reasonably be available for the next 2 subsequent fiscal years. That sounds complicated. We can put that together fairly quickly. That's something that if you wanted to meet next week, we might be able to get by the end of the week or early next week, at least those numbers on a piece of paper, understanding a couple different models.
Can I have some thoughts from the Finance Commission on what Tony has just said? Yes. Kelly?
I think the modeling is really, really important to see what the impact on reserves is. And I agree that I think it's more important than the discretionary spending. I think what would be better if we said to the different departments and we said, you know, once we see the reserves, if we're not comfortable, we say, you've got to find 5% of your budget because based on the novel, we need it. And then you figure out how to get rid of it. I think that would probably be a better waste of time, to Tony's point, than having people spend a lot of time gathering information that, you know, again, best guess, and it can always change. So I agree with Mr. Bazooka.
That discretionary number is easier to come up with when it's a number, and then we've got to try to figure it out. So maybe, all right, in year 2, we're looking at $400,000. We think we can cover X with discretionary.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Slater.
Thanks, Ann. You know, again, when I'm talking about discretionary spending, as Tony mentioned earlier, I'm not talking about the paperclip accounts. I'm not talking about $500 here, $1,000 there. I'm talking about some more significant items. I mean, I'll mention 2 as an example. One that has already been mentioned, that's the pension catch-up. Great idea. I endorse it heartily. I think it's something we should have been doing. We did years ago. We stopped. We should have continued to do it. We haven't. But it's $500,000 that if we don't spend it on that, is not money that's going to take away from personnel or some of our services. Number 2, some of the additional road work that we've done, and there's really 3 buckets of road work. And I really don't want to get into a lot of details now, but you have the Chapter 90, you have the road work money that was approved under the override, then you have some additional money. Again, great idea. Catch up with road work because, you know, certainly, you know, we have more need than we have dollars, but you're probably talking $400,000 or $500,000 there. And, you know, those are the kinds of things that you know, that I'm looking at. And again, we're not looking at the paperclip accounts, you know, or spending, you know, $1,000 worth of staff time to save $1,500 worth of cost somewhere. I think it's something that, that's important that we look at, that we take a vote on, that we make our positions known to our town meeting members at the time that we have town meeting in June.
Okay, thank you. So I think how about I need a motion here is what I need. Okay.
Well, I have a comment.
Yes.
To Alan's point, I think that's good. I mean, those are big ticket items. Those are really impactful. And I would just like us to consider that they're in the budget today. Earlier in the earlier vote, I favored keeping the budget as is, but you know, one suggestion I would have is those are 2 spending items that if we had an opportunity to defer them to the fall meeting for spending, that is, put them in the budget now with a stipulation that those are 2 ticket items that we would say this amount of money will not be spent effective July 1 until such time as we're able to revisit. Hopefully in the fall meeting, we have a better idea of what our financial position is. Seems to me that, you know, that we will accomplish sort of the keeping our spending at, you know, accomplish what the FinCom does want to do in terms of keeping our spending in check until such time as we have a better handle on our expenses. They're still there. There's still opportunity to affect the programs, the payments, and what have you. But we just defer them until later part of the year where we have more, we have a better perspective of what our revenue flow is. So, you know, that would be one way that I would consider looking at it. I think Alan's on the right track because I don't really think we're going to get much out of discretionary spending. You know, whether it's supplies, paperclips, what have you. I think if you're really talking about something that's going to be substantive, it really has to be something in the numbers that those 2 recommendations, or those two items that Alan has mentioned has. So that would be one approach that I would suggest we take a look at.
Okay. So, yes, Judy.
I agree with I agree with Bob and Alan. If we could, and I said this last week, if we could, sort of put a little break on the spending and let's see where we are in the fall. Those are 2 items. Now, I don't know if there's some other items in there, such as the new phone system for the schools and new vans for special ed. Maybe we shouldn't get 4. Maybe we should get 3. I don't know. Maybe you're going to put that now on the credit card. I don't know. But these are the things we could look at to say, ordinarily, if we didn't have a problem, we would come right out of the chute July 1st and we would go and spend it. Maybe those are the things we've got to look at, and we feel a bit more secure on knowing that we're not going to take this spending plan, which I said the budget is finished at town meeting, and then it becomes a spending plan. Putting some brakes on it and looking then in the fall where we are.
Okay, Tony?
Just a final wrap-up point, just so everyone remembers, we have already deferred a couple $1 million in capital purchases to the fall. We still have those needs, so we'll be taking it up in the fall. But remember, the original budget as presented included using around $2.8 million in free cash for capital. We then said make that borrowing, and now we said, you know what, everything that's not absolutely essential to order now, we're pushing off to the fall. So we are sort of already in our phase 2 of making adjustments to the budget. So to that point, we are delaying some of those big ticket items already. And then if the situation is dire in the fall, we probably will take a hard look at the capital plan and say, we really need to fix this facility here or this one here, and maybe we don't do it. So we can get you some modeling options, but we are kicking I don't want to say kicking, we're just delaying a number of most, I'd say the overwhelming majority of our capital already off to the fall. So we have already done a lot of that.
Okay. Kelly?
Sorry, I didn't hit the mute button fast enough. So I just want to say, just to agree with Judy, Alan, and Bob, what they all said. I agree with that. I think those large ticket items and identifying those is a good way to start to figure out what we potentially could cut that has a meaningful impact. So I agree with 100% with that approach.
Okay. So let's get this in the form of a motion so that we can give Mr. Mizuko, Mr. McQuaid, and the superintendent of schools, and all of the folks that work with them, a concrete thing to work for us for the end of next week. I mean, I'm not adverse to doing this on a Saturday even, so, okay. Okay, folks, I need a motion here.
We will get you some modeling options for revenue changes and revenue losses and how we would adjust them for the next couple fiscal years.
Okay. All right, Bob. Thank you, Tony.
No, I think that's fine. And at that time, perhaps, I think we can get the modeling, but I think we ought to just keep in mind our conversations regarding some of the items, the big ticket items that Alan has put forward. And I would just suggest we keep our eye on the fact that we are deferring some capital items later in the fall. Is there a lot, is it much different for us to also defer the pension catch-up payment and some of the road paving to also that meeting, so that we can have an opportunity at that point in time to assess, maybe in September or rather in October, we have a better opportunity or better fiscal picture. But yes, we can go forward with the catch-up. We can go forward with the road paving. We're in good shape. I just want us to keep that in mind as well as we do our modeling.
Okay, I think our team has heard what we're saying, and I think that we're going to need a date. Do you want me to do the date offline? Talk to others, get a date, and then see what we can do for the next meeting, and then go from there. Okay.
Why wouldn't we just? Why can't we just? We're all here. I mean, we know that Monday's a holiday. Can we meet Tuesday?
Does Tuesday give you folks enough time?
Is that too early?
Wait a minute. I've got Dr. Thompson is shaking his head. Tony, I can hear you.
I'll talk to you, Dave. we're looking at sort of a big picture change to the revenues at this point. We can get something by Tuesday. You're going to have one simple spreadsheet. It's going to say option one is revenues have changed by this much. Here's how we project to fill those revenues. And here's what subsequent reserves will be available in following years. So we can get that kind of an analysis by next week, because that's not getting into the weeds of changing line item budgets. So that I'll work with you, Dave. We can have that for next week.
Okay. Is that all right? Now, who out of my group can meet on Tuesday?
Mhm.
Can you raise your hand, please? Judy, can you meet Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay, let's go by roll call. Bob, Tuesday?
Yes.
Yeah, Kelly,
Yes, after 4.
after 4. Who am I, Alan?
Yes.
Judy already said yes before she left us, and I'm a yes. Okay, Tuesday, do you need 4:30, Bob, or Kelly, do you need a little later start?
4 is cool. So anytime after 4 you guys think is appropriate for everyone else is cool. Just as long as I can have till 4.
Okay, Bob?
I'm saying 4 o'clock is fine.
Okay, so 4 o'clock on Tuesday.
Tuesday the
And
19th.
Tuesday the
It's
26th.
Tuesday the 19th, isn't it?
no, that's
Tuesday the
tomorrow.
26th.
Oh, wrong Tuesday, okay.
That's what we're talking, Tuesday, the 26th.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mizuko, are you all right with that? You've got your, do you have a meeting with the selectmen afterwards?
I do, but let's hope we don't go more than 3 hours here.
Okay, we've been kind of pushing that lately. All right. I could, are we all set? Can we?
Mhm.
Just a minute.
Yep.
I just want to make a couple of comments here. I really appreciate the dialogue here. There are a lot of opinions. We're trying to come up with consensus here, which I think we can. But I do appreciate getting this out to the public, that we are all concerned about what's going on and the effect it's going to have in the future. So thank you all for having this discussion.
I think that's reflected, and you have spoken well for all of us, Judy. Thank you. Okay, anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Wait,
Second.
yep. Wait, 1 sec. Tony?
Motion's been made and seconded on the motion. We'll be preparing a list of talking points for everyone. I would encourage everyone on this call and anyone watching at home, you should be reaching out to your state legislators as well as the delegation, the House leadership and the Senate leadership in Massachusetts. You can certainly reach out to the federal level, and the chairs of House and Senate Ways and Means, and encouraging them under no circumstances should they consider cutting a local aid. I think the MMA, among other organizations, have made a strategic blunder by allowing the discussion to be, well, how much is state aid going to get cut? And the discussion from the very beginning should have been,
Right.
there's no way you can cut state aid. You can't cut aid to cities and towns in the middle of a pandemic. And I think, unfortunately, I'll put the fault squarely at MMA for not being more aggressive and saying that our point coming out the gate should have been, under no circumstances can the state cut aid to cities and towns and to schools, because we're on the front line of this. The state actually is not on the front line of it. So we can get some talking points out to everyone. Encourage you, your friends and family, to tell the state, if we say nothing, we will have an aid cut, and it will be substantial. Some state reps have already gone to their communities and said, we're hearing it's 20%. Well, the reason they're doing that is because they're going to tell you it's 20%, and then you'll say, oh my God, that's terrible. And they'll come back and say, we took care of it, it's only 10.5. But the answer should be, our expectation of our delegation is that it's 0, that the governor's budget go forward as it is, because there's no way you can reduce school aid in a pandemic, and there's no way you can reduce public services in a pandemic. If we continue the narrative that we accept it's going to happen, which too many towns I think have already done early out the gate, then the state's going to say everyone's preparing for it, let's go ahead and do it. But the attitude from every official in our community, every community, should be that it's unacceptable for the state to do it. Nobody disagrees with the fact that we're locked down. They've made those decisions. They control what taxes we can raise. Our attitude and our opinion should be, not a single dime comes out of state aid, because we're on the front lines of this crisis. We're the ones responsible for educating children and providing public services, not the Commonwealth. They just set the laws and send back. So we will be sending talking points out. The committee as a whole, I think, should send something. Folks as individuals, if they hear from us, they will not take the same kind of action that we're worrying that they're going to take. They need to hear from all of us. They need to hear from the community that it's not acceptable for them to cut state aid in a situation like this.
Question, Tony?
Yes, ma'am.
On the state level, isn't the governor responsible for a balanced budget? And if so, how can he not consider cutting state at the local aid?
Just like I have to deal with a lot of budgetary issues, and I get told tough and come up with a budget, the governor needs to do it too, and the legislature does as well. Remember that they have other avenues that they can cut that are not cities and towns. We are the ones on the front line of this, not the state. He has other agencies he can look at. The legislature can raise taxes if they want to. They can raise fees. They have a rainy day fund. It should not simply be things aren't great, dump it on cities and towns to deal with it. That's always been the attitude. Cities and towns have always just accepted it, and they've taken it on the chin every year. And there needs to be a time where we say, absolutely not. We're the ones on the front line of this. It's our police that are responding to the domestic violence claims, calls, and to the mental health calls. It's our EMTs who are transporting COVID patients. It's our teachers that we pay for that were thrown out of the classrooms, and it's our children who aren't getting the same education that they would have got last year. So it's the Commonwealth's responsibility to us to keep us whole, and they have to go find the money. Just like we're going to go and find the money, they have to do it as well. It's irresponsible for them to dump onto the people responding to it. Also, the financial challenges from it. They have revenues. They have a easier way of dealing with the federal government. They have to bear some responsibility instead of just saying, we're coming up with the rules, we're telling you all this, but we're also going to cut your aid. By the way, your ability to raise taxes and revenue is limited. Why don't we have a local sales tax? Why don't we raise the meals tax? Why don't we do all these different things that we might be able to do? The state doesn't allow us to. So they've set the framework. They have a responsibility to honor their commitments to cities and towns, because everyone on this committee and everyone on this call, we still pay taxes to the Commonwealth. So.
And MMA, you're saying they're not with us?
I wouldn't say they're not with us. I think they've made a strategic failure from the beginning and not having their opening position be absolutely no cuts to state aid. Government and education is going to cost more next year. They should be looking at how to increase it. And MMA, they're setting up some meetings. They're trying to facilitate communications. But I think there's a strategic failure there. The attitude has not been from the beginning. Absolutely none of what circumstances you cut public services when we're responding to a pandemic. There isn't a department of this town that isn't responding to the pandemic, and you're going to reduce services available to them. In what world does that make sense? No world. So the state should absolutely not be looking to dump any of its cost or budget issues onto us. The state has reduced income tax every year for the last several years. Have we reduced our sales tax? Have we reduced any of our taxes? No, we've gone way up. So it's on the Commonwealth to honor its commitment to cities and towns. But if we remain silent, it becomes easy for them. Just like what we do here. If there was some department we could eliminate and nobody would complain about it, we'd all say, oh, well, there's the library. There's no more library. Nobody says anything about it and no complaints about it. Not that we just respond to the complaints. We make the decisions we have to make. But if they don't hear from city and town officials that it's unacceptable, they're just going to go and look to balance as much of their budget on our backs as possible. We need to be sure that we're pushing back and saying, you're not balancing your budget on us because we are still providing services to people.
Well, all the more reason why we shouldn't be going ahead with the current budget in order to get into their condition when they do cut it, if they do cut it. You make a very good point, and I hope you go before them to make that point.
Okay. Now, where were we? Do we have a motion on the?
There was a motion and a second.
Alan made a motion.
Okay, thank you. Alan,
Yes.
Judy,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Ian, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we need a motion to adjourn, unless you want to continue this.
I thought that was the motion to adjourn.
That was the motion to adjourn.
Was, yeah.
Oh, I thought we were the meeting. Okay, that was the motion. I'm sorry. This is better.
Maybe we should do it all over. Did we get a second on it?
Okay, then I guess we're adjourned.